So today we're doing something a little different. Usually I hop right into the civilization gaming, but I promised that I would review a book on Twitch, so we're doing that. The name of the book is Defeating Darwinism by Opening Minds by Philip E. Johnson. This is a subject that I actually find very, very interesting. Whether the theory of evolution, origin of species, is initially propounded by Charles Darwin, is, as the intelligent design proponents say, riddled with holes, gaps, self-contradictions, or if it's all a bunch of smoke and mirrors by a few Christian partisans to try to create doubt and, as this book puts it, insert the wedge for their own conception of reality, which is not based on materialism, but based on spiritual considerations. So now I'm going to summarize this book as well as I can and discuss some of the things that I had problems with and some of the things that I found interesting or insightful. First of all, up until recently, I was of the opinion, or I should say I was under the impression, that the theory of evolution was crumbling under the weight of recent evidence about the actual origin of species. And that impression was based on some YouTube videos that I watched, including a group interview with some statistician, computer scientists, muckety mucks, these really erudite sounding guys who basically said that Charles Darwin was full of it because you couldn't possibly, in the amount of time that life has existed on Earth, created what you see all around, the immense complexity all around us through random mutation and natural selection, that there just wasn't enough time. It would be tantamount or be analogous to unleashing a tornado in a junkyard and expecting with enough time for a jumbo jet to appear, or giving 1,000 monkeys 1,000 typewriters and leaving them alone for 300 million years and expecting them eventually to produce the complete works of William Shakespeare. That's the analogy that I hear the evolution skeptics frequently raising, saying that basically that is not just a statistical improbability, it's for all purposes impossible. Could not happen. And similarly, with evolution, even on the molecular level, the probabilities are so staggeringly small that life would randomly, just spontaneously emerge from random, this random mutations and natural selection. That was my understanding, and I was convinced by that. More recently, though, and after being asked to review this book, I've done a little bit more digging and have found that the problem is being a little bit overstated. The problem is being overstated. So, for example, on the molecular level, only 1 out of 100 billion combinations of amino acids will yield usable proteins as the building blocks of life. I read that somewhere. And if only 1 out of 100 billion uh, combinations yield the protein, then you wouldn't expect necessarily to have that combination occur randomly. But yeah, I guess to a layman, 1 out of 100 billion seems like a lot. But when you consider the number of molecules, for example, in a glass of water, which is trillions, and you consider the amount of time that these molecular ingredients have been on the earth, suddenly it doesn't seem like such an impossibility. There were other instances, there were other problems cited in this book that I did some research on. One was Philip Johnson talks about the supposed gaps in the fossil record. For you would expect to see, if Darwin was right, in the fossil record, you would expect to see not just, okay, you've got like a trilobite here and a human being here. You would expect to see fossils for every intermediary step along the way. Um, and the record evidently doesn't have those fossils. That's what Philip Johnson says. Um, that's not. That is not entirely correct. Um, I've been doing a little research on that, and the fact of the matter is that all the time we are finding more and more transitional fossils that link these different stages of evolution. For example, a relatively recent example is this whale, the whale, right? Okay, so let's see the evolution of the whale. I wonder if there. Let me check the news on this. When whales could walk. Okay, this was from 11 hours ago. Reacto Mag, Evolution in Action. PBS is When Whales Could Walk. Yes, I'm 18 years old. Okay, it says, this is a I guess a documentary or a brief. Yeah, this is a Nova documentary discussing the evolution of whales from terrestrial to aquatic creatures. Land animals. Whereas it's generally agreed that land animals evolved from aquatic creatures that came out of the water to hunt and feed, it seems that I can't pronounce that, turned around and went back in. The question the documentary asks is how and why, and along with that, when. So here we have an infographic showing how what looks sort of like like a sort of, I don't know, like a dog-looking creature might have evolved into a whale. And every step here is like plausible, right? And all of these are fossils that have been found. These are all fossils that exist. You can see here, this is not a complete skeleton. This is actually like this skeleton actually exists. They found it in this state of disrepair. Let me see if I can find a better infographic. Check this one out. This one looks interesting. Here we've got this rodent-looking thing that turned into sort of like a seal-looking thing. And the seal-looking thing, its legs sort of atrophied, and the legs slowly morphed into fins. Yeah, so there you go. The whale's one example. Let me show you another one. The horse. I thought this was particularly cool because these what we see here, every step along the way has fossil evidence to support it. Hold up, no, that's not what I want. I want to look at this image here. From this sort of dog looking thing to a zebra looking thing to finally this regal looking horse. There's nothing particularly implausible about any of this. So one of the things that Philip Johnson does in his book is he tries to distinguish between microevolution and macroevolution. He says that, well, nobody disputes what Charles Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands, right? Nobody disputes that environmental pressures might result in marginal changes in the size of a finch's beak, for example. What we're disputing is that natural evolution, or that evolution through mutation and natural selection could have created the finch in the first place. So that we don't dispute that these organisms or these creatures can evolve or change on the margins. It's just that is everybody agrees that there's evolution when it comes to that. What we're disagreeing with is that the proliferation of species on Earth was a consequence of evolution, completely divorced from any sort of consciousness or like consciousness or intelligent design. Um, and one of the reasons he says that's impossible is because of this thing called what he calls irreducible complexity. He says, for example, how can you say that evolution resulted in the human eye when which is a very complex thing? The evolutionary steps that would lead to this complex thing would result in a completely useless appendage on your body. Like, unless the eye is fully formed, it's useless, is basically what he said in this book. And that point is demonstrably false. That point is demonstrably false. That there are plenty of examples in the natural world of less developed eyes conferring competitive advantage on the animals that have them. Like a collection of photosensitive cells on a small creature like this or a bug or whatever. Even if you're not seeing, you don't have the ability to discern discrete objects, just by having a sensitivity to light gives you an advantage over an animal or a competitor that doesn't have that sensitivity, because you can see where up is. You can follow the light. You can follow the light into sources of food, for example. You can detect predators overhead. A shadow passing over you might trigger a flight reflex, for example. So that's a perfect example of what I guess you could call it a proto-eye, yielding conferring a competitive advantage that would have like an evolutionary pressure, right? The animals that had that photosensitive collection of cells on them would prosper, succeed, reproduce, and those that didn't would comparatively, they would be less successful, and so they would reproduce less. Another example that he cites in here, so that's just wrong. That's just wrong. Another thing that he cites in here is this thing with flagellum, a flagella or flagellum, this little tail-looking thing on a cell. or like like on a sperm, for example, it has this tail that serves as a propulsive role. He says that this thing has multiple parts, and that there would be no way for it to evolve gradually, because any one of these parts individually would not confer an advantage on the organism. Um, for example, the flagellum, which is this appendage-looking thing, right? This tail, it looks like a tail, basically. He says, well, if you had that by itself, but you didn't have the motor or whatever that causes the thing to oscillate, it's useless. It's just dead weight, and it would um, serve no purpose. But I did some research on that as well, and discovered that, well, no, actually, flagella-looking appendages on cells uh, can serve a purpose, even if they don't have all of the ingredients of operative tail, right? Like, for example, they can be used to inject toxins into other cells. Okay, there's one example. So I think part of the problem with Philip B. Johnson's reasoning is that he's assuming that the appendage can only serve as a propulsive device or nothing. But nature is very resourceful. So if you have this little appendage, even though it can't serve a propulsive role because it doesn't have all the parts, maybe there's something else that it can do until it evolves the parts that serve as a propulsive tail. Um, I don't know. He kind of embarks on this sort of static analysis that says, well, it's a propulsion or nothing. I don't think that that's true. And my research into that question um, confirms my skepticism. There was one point that he raised that I thought was really noteworthy. There was one section in this book, in the last third of it, that really made me scratch my head and ponder. When he was discussing molecular biology and the distinction between matter and information, he embarks on this discussion by in opposition to Richard Dawkins' view. According to this book, Richard Dawkins professes the view that everything is material, and that DNA or RNA is basically just strings of amino acids that randomly joined together in the primordial soup, and they just happened to have a communicative, or rather the RNA that was able to, or DNA that was able to replicate and communicate something functional was successful, and the junk RNA or junk DNA that wasn't able to do those things fell by the wayside. Um, and so everything is just boils down to the material. Um, but what I really liked about what Philip B. Johnson said was that Richard Dawkins is conflating the medium of communication with the substance of the communication. The DNA strand is like a page in a book, but the thing that is communicated through it is not material. The thing that's communicated through it is data, it's information, which has no substance. but it has no substance, but it exists. I thought that whole conversation really made me scratch my head, and I googled it and tried to find other discussions like that, and was not able to find anything similar. I'm still sort of plumbing the depths of the internet for that. But I think he might be onto something there. The difference between information and matter. Um, Apart from that, I did find the book very digestible. It was very accessible for somebody that is not well versed in the sciences. I am not well versed. I have a sort of like a high school grasp of the sciences, and this book is designed for somebody like that, um, which is great. The problem with it is that the first third of it, about that much of the book, is devoted to this highly partisan historical discussion of what he perceives as the persecution of intelligent design. He goes on and on and on about inherit the wind, and instead of just addressing the science on the merits, it's this long, he's playing a historian here and going on about how people who, basically this narrative that evolutionists are oppressors, and there's a conspiracy among um, the in the science world to suppress uh, the intelligent design theory. That's a third of the book, and it's only maybe, and then he gets back to it in the last 20% of the book. So really, I guess maybe 40% of the book is devoted to a discussion of actual science. And in that discussion, he talks about, like I've already said, the statistical improbability of life randomly occurring, which it's actually not that improbable, number one. Number two is the missing links in the fossil record. And the fact remains that that argument becomes more and more tenuous as time passes, because we're always finding new fossils and we're always finding new missing links. Like it's happening all the time. Um, so, he can point to a missing link here and a missing link there, but it's only a matter of time before we find those things. Um, and then the Cambrian explosion and all this sort of stuff, which I've heard 1,000 times. And then he talks about irreducible complexity, which is not, in my opinion, does not really refute evolution, because we have the specific examples he cites are explainable. Like, oh no, they are reducible. A less developed eye does confer a competitive advantage. A less developed flagella that can serve a competitive advantage that might not be propulsion, might be something else. Or like, how does a fin evolve? Somebody that has arms, how does he develop a fin, right? Well, we have examples in human populations of people that have webbed fingers. And in an environment where the webbed fingers confer a competitive advantage, they'll reproduce more readily, survive more readily, pass those genes, those mutations onto their offspring, and suddenly everyone's got webbed fingers. And then slowly that the fin aspect of the limb maybe becomes more and more pronounced, and before you know it, we've got fins. Like, why is that so difficult to grasp? But the thing that really stuck with me in this, albeit brief, discussion of the science was this information versus matter. I'll only say one more thing two more things about this book. Number one, the problem with what he's proposing here is he wants, basically his mission with this book and with his whole body of work, because he's written, this is not his only work, he's written several books on this subject, right? His whole mission with this is to poke holes or identify gaps, I should say, not poke holes, identify gaps in knowledge in the theory of evolution, basically. And then to insist that the only way to fill those gaps or to explain those gaps is there was an intelligent creator. The problem with that mission is that the gaps are always changing, because he'll raise it, he'll point to a gap here, and then science addresses it. So the gaps are ever changing and ever shrinking. And then but he wants us to assume, for the sake of argument, that the gaps are unfillable without an intelligent creator. And that leads me to the second problem. The second problem with that worldview is that if you allow yourself to fall back on intelligent design as an explanation for any gap in the evolutionary record or knowledge of evolution, what is the point of pursuing further knowledge? Like, oh gosh, we can't possibly explain how the eye evolved. Well, it was the creator. It was intelligent design. Okay, well, I suppose we ought to just stop our inquiry there. So I think the reason why scientists, he says, oh, they're prejudiced against God, they're prejudiced against intelligent design. Yeah, they're prejudiced against intelligent design, because if they accept intelligent design, there's no reason for them to continue doing their work and trying to push back, advance the frontier of human knowledge. God did it. Okay, case closed. Why go any further? So thank goodness, or if you prefer, thank God, we're not at a place right now where we're ready to throw our hands up in the air and just attribute anything that we don't know to God. I'm glad that there are people that refuse to do that, because there's still a lot of phenomenon, including, I think, a lot of aspects of evolution that can be explained and should be explained by reference to the natural world, to the material world. And the reason I think it's important that we continue to go in that direction is because of what our work in evolution has already yielded. The advances in medicine, for example, are tied directly. Modern medicine is thanks to Darwin. Like, our ability to understand and plumb the evolution of diseases and pathogens and all that is because of Darwin. Understanding how a bacteria develops immunity to what are they called? You take not an antiviral, antibiotics, right? Like, oh, the bacteria eventually are exposed to antibiotics, and if you expose them to antibiotics long enough, they develop immunity. How can you explain that? Evolution. It's evolution, right? That's what's happening there. So the ones that aren't immune die off. The ones that mutate in order to mutate and acquire an immunity, they replicate, and that's how you get antibiotic immunity. The same goes with viruses, right? Like, oh, we found an antidote to this, that, or the other virus. COVID was the big one, right? Like, we have vaccines. We have vaccines that can give you immunity to COVID. Okay, all right, great. Oh, well, no, to that kind of COVID, because now we have a new kind of COVID that evolved in response to the immunity that people developed because of vaccines. So the theory of evolution is not just some pie in the sky kind of like, oh, let's ponder the mysteries of the universe for its own sake, although that's important. Don't for a moment think that that's not important. Knowledge for its own sake is important. But it also yields, or it has yielded, huge practical benefits um, that we wouldn't have had if, 100 years ago we had said, well, God did it. And that's the end of the conversation. So no, I'm not ready to surrender the evolutionary inquiry to an intelligent designer. I'm not ready to do that. That being said, skepticism is healthy in all pursuit, but what in all pursuits. But what I don't like is where I feel like if I feel like I'm being manipulated. I don't think Philip E. Johnson is manipulating me. But I have seen some skeptics of evolution, these people that go on YouTube and talk about how evolution is all big fantasy and so on. And they make arguments that I know are at best erroneous, but more likely just dishonest. Like they're being knowingly dishonest in their presentation of the science in order to advance their agenda, which is to make people believe in their religion, basically. And the way that they're trying to do that is by taking the black box of science and throwing some jargon around and trying to like couch their religious point of view in scientific terms, because when you speak in scientific terms, it sounds very elevated. It sounds irrefutable. That's what I don't like. And so when I'm reading this, I'm looking very, very carefully for examples of, okay, here's someone that's trying, basically a proponent of pseudoscience. I didn't find that here, which was good. He seemed like he was trying his best to be intellectually honest. And the thing that drove that home for me was the last few pages of the book. In the last few pages of the book, he says that what you need to do as you're confronting evolution and its most ardent supporters is you have to keep your baloney alarm in tune. You've got to point your baloney alarm at every assertion that an evolutionist makes, right? And I said, okay, sure. Why not? But then he said, we also have to be prepared to have their baloney alarms pointed at our assertions. And we need to be prepared for the consequences of that scrutiny, no matter what they are, even if we don't like the conclusions that arise from that scrutiny. I thought that was very fair-minded of him. And he said that our children, the way that we proceed in terms of educating our kids cannot be to shield them from the theory of evolution. You can't hope, you can't shield them from get them to the point where they're agreeing with you and then forbid them from pursuing any further inquiry. He said at some point you just have to be willing to let go and the facts will fall where they will. I like the last chapter of his book in that regard. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Okay. The last thing I'll say is if you want a very substantive, point for point refutation of the so-called scientific arguments used by intelligent design proponents, you ought to just go onto YouTube and type in Debunking Intelligent Design. And this guy right here has a well, no, that's not the video we want. I want the 3 hour, there's a 3 hour video. It's by this guy right here. Oh no, this is
with
him.
other terminology that they themselves.
Okay, so it's the definitive guide to debunking creationists, and it's a 3 hour video that basically it addresses every point in this book, in my opinion, convincingly, other than the difference between matter and information. He doesn't address that, but he addresses satisfactorily every other scientific point raised in this book, in my opinion. He is an avowed atheist, okay, and he's not kind to intelligent people that, the sort of the talking heads of intelligent design, because he basically thinks that they're being intentionally dishonest. By trying to couch their theology in science, he thinks that that's deception. And in a way, I think it's certainly misguided. It might be intentionally deceptive, but I think maybe in some instances it's not. It's certainly misguided. Because the whole concept behind the whole motivation behind intelligent design literature, it seems to me, is to try to fit a square peg in a round hole, and that is to try to find a scientific rationale for theological questions. Science and religion are not compatible, nor should they be, because they are, and intelligent design is spinning its wheels to try to make them compatible and reconcile them. It ain't gonna happen. It's just not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is because science and religion address two completely different questions. The science addresses how things happen, how things happened. Okay, it addresses the how. Religion addresses the why. Completely different question. You're never going to have a scientist that's going to be like, well, let's talk about why the universe exists. Because science doesn't care about why. It cares about how. And I think, frankly, I think maybe religion needs to start taking a similar attitude towards the how. They're there to address the spiritual implications, spiritual whys and wherefores of existence, but we don't need we don't need religion to understand the natural universe. That's just my opinion. And by the way, I am a religious person. I believe in God. I guess if this dude's got like he's got categories here. Let me take a look if I can find the categories. Okay, here are his categories. Types of creationism: most scientific, least unscientific. If I had to put myself on here, I would say I was theistic evolution. Theistic evolution is second from the bottom. Deistic evolution says basically that God is the great watchmaker. He set the universe in motion with all of its laws and rules that science explains, and is completely uninterested in what happens with his own creation. His involvement completely ceased at that point in time. And I think theistic evolution is that with one difference. Theistic evolution is the notion that God continues to be interested in his creation and is invested in how should I put this? What happens to our souls because of what we do here, basically. I think that most closely aligns with my view. Um, well, there you have it. My review of Defeating Darwinism by Opening Minds. Strongly recommend that you listen to Professor Dave's explanation of evolution as in opposition to intelligent design, because he will explain far better than I did or could why a lot of the arguments that intelligent designers marshal are either outdated, erroneous, or simply dishonest. All right. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.